Salesman humiliated the farmer, but when he discovered his fortune, Thomas Miller surveyed the luxury car dealership with a mixture of determination and apprehension. At 68, the farmer never imagined he would be treated with such disdain, simply because of his simple appearance. But he was about to show that appearances truly are deceiving. It was the third time Thomas had entered that dealership, and the third time that salesman, Ryan Matthews, had received him with contempt. The young man in an impeccable suit barely disguised his disdain upon seeing the elderly gentleman in a straw, hat-faded shirt and calloused hands approach the luxury vehicles. "Can I help you?" asked Ryan in a bored tone, without even looking directly at Thomas. "Good morning, young man. I came to see that big truck over there," replied the elderly man, pointing to the most expensive model in the dealership. Ryan couldn't contain a mocking laugh. "Sir, that's a premium model. It costs over $800,000. Perhaps you'd like to see something more suitable for your budget?" he suggested with an air of superiority, while exchanging knowing glances with another salesman. Thomas maintained his dignity despite the humiliation. "I'd like to see that one, please. Look, I'll be honest. We're very busy today with customers who can actually afford to buy." Ryan gestured towards some businessmen on the other side of the showroom. "I don't want to make you waste time on something that is clearly not for your level." At that moment, an elegant woman of about 45 was observing the scene from her glass-walled office. Margaret Thompson, the new regional manager, had just taken over that Lancaster branch of North Star Motors after years of working at the headquarters in Philadelphia. She didn't like what she saw at all. As Thomas, humiliated, turned his back to leave, Margaret quickly left her office. "Excuse me, sir," she called, approaching with a genuine smile. "I'm Margaret Thompson, manager of this dealership. I notice my colleague couldn't assist you properly. May I help you?" Thomas looked at her hesitant. He was already tired of the treatment he had received during his recent visits. "I appreciate it, ma'am, but I don't think I'm welcome here," he replied, adjusting his straw hat. "That's not true, Mr. Miller." Thomas Miller. "Mr. Miller, everyone is welcome here. Please tell me how I can help you today." The gentleman hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm interested in that line of large trucks. I need to renew my fleet." Ryan, who was observing the interaction from a distance, couldn't suppress a little chuckle. Margaret noticed and shot him a stern look. "Fleet? You have more than one truck?" she asked, genuinely interested. "I currently have 17 trucks, ma'am. Miller Transport serves the entire region, and I'm looking to expand into Montana." Ryan immediately stopped laughing. Margaret smiled, ignoring the surprise stamped on the salesman's face. "It would be my pleasure to show you our options. Shall we go to my office to better discuss your needs?" As they walked, Thomas glanced sideways at Ryan, who now seemed to be trying to hide behind a catalog. What the arrogant salesman didn't know was that this simple-looking gentleman was one of the largest corn and soybean producers in Pennsylvania Dutch country, owner of 4 farms and a considerable fleet that transported not only his own production, but also provided services to other producers in the region. In Margaret's office, the conversation flowed easily. Thomas explained his needs, and after 2 hours had placed an initial order for 5 trucks worth more than $4 million. "You're different from the other salespeople," commented Thomas as he signed the papers. "The other times I came here, I left without even getting to see the models up close." Margaret frowned, concerned. "You've visited us before?" "3 times. I was always helped by that young man, Ryan. He always found a way to dismiss me, saying I was looking at things beyond my reach." Margaret's face hardened. She had been at the management of that branch for only 2 weeks, transferred from Philadelphia, with the mission of improving the results of the dealership that had been performing below expectations. "Mr. Miller, I sincerely apologize for the treatment you received. That doesn't represent our company's values, and I can assure you it won't happen again." Thomas shrugged. "You get used to it, you know. It's no different from what happens in other places when they see me like this with these simple clothes and this old hat. People only see what they want to see." "But it shouldn't be that way," Margaret replied with conviction. "And as long as I'm here, it won't be." In that moment, more than a business relationship was born. It was the beginning of a transformation that would affect not just North Star Motors, but the lives of everyone around that unlikely friendship between the executive from the city and the farmer from the countryside. As they left the office, Margaret made a point of formally introducing Thomas to the entire team, highlighting that he had just become one of the dealership's biggest customers. Ryan's eyes widened and his face paled when Margaret announced the value of the purchase he had lost. "Ryan, please come to my office when Mr. Miller leaves," said Margaret, with a polite smile that didn't hide the firmness of her intentions. At the end of that afternoon, after a tense meeting with Margaret, Ryan left the dealership carrying his belongings in a box. Outside, under the strong Lancaster sun, he encountered Thomas, who was waiting for his driver to arrive to take him back to the farm. "You got what you wanted, didn't you?" said Ryan bitterly. "Got me fired." Thomas adjusted his hat and looked calmly at the young man. "I didn't ask for anyone to be fired, son. I just wanted to buy trucks for my business." "Yeah. Now you're playing the nice guy, a rich old man who likes to dress like a hillbilly just to humiliate others." Thomas sighed, running his hand over his face, wrinkled by time and work. "You know what the difference is between the two of us, young man? I never needed to humiliate anyone to feel like somebody. I've worked on farms since I was 7 years old. I lost my father early and had to help my mother raise my 4 siblings. Every penny I have today was earned with a lot of sweat. And you know what I learned? That clothes don't make the man. Character does." A black car stopped in front of the dealership, and the driver signaled to Thomas. "I hope you learned something from this, son. It's never too late to change." As the car pulled away, Ryan stood motionless, holding his box of belongings and reflecting on how his prejudice had cost him not only a large commission, but also his job and dignity. Inside the dealership, Margaret was analyzing sales reports when she received a call from Paul Mitchell, the regional director and her direct boss. "Margaret, what happened today? I received a notification about a dismissal you carried out without consulting HR. Paul, I caught a salesman humiliating a customer who ended up closing a deal worth over $4 million. The company policy is clear regarding conduct with customers." "$4 million? Paul's tone changed instantly. "Well, that's impressive." "Who is the customer?" "Thomas Miller, owner of Miller Transport and 4 farms in the region, a very simple and humble gentleman who was treated like a vagrant 3 consecutive times when visiting our store." I see. Paul seemed to be mentally calculating. "Well, in that case, I think you followed the correct procedure. Just keep me informed next time, okay? Remember that you're still in your probationary period in management." After hanging up, Margaret felt a twinge of irritation. Paul was more interested in the value of the sale than in the inappropriate treatment of the customer. This confirmed what she had already noticed in the first few weeks. The culture of that branch was compromised, prioritizing quick results at the expense of quality service and respect. This was exactly why headquarters had sent her to that unit. The numbers had been falling quarter after quarter, while complaints were increasing. Her mission was clear: transform the local culture and recover the brand's reputation in the region. What Margaret didn't imagine was that that encounter with Thomas would be just the beginning of a journey that would test her professional and personal limits and forever change the destiny of that dealership and everyone around it. The next morning, Margaret arrived early at the dealership. She had spent much of the night developing a plan to transform the team's culture. The first measure would be a general meeting before the store opened. "Good morning, everyone," she began, observing the sleepy faces and some clearly disinterested ones. "Yesterday we had a situation that made me reflect on who we are as a company and as a team. A customer was repeatedly humiliated for his appearance, and that customer ended up making one of the largest purchases of the year." Murmurs ran through the room as some employees exchanged glances. "From today on, I want to make something very clear. In this dealership, we don't judge books by their covers. Every person who crosses that door deserves respect and excellent service, regardless of how they dress or how much we think they can spend." Charles, one of the most senior salesmen, raised his hand with a cynical smile. "With all due respect, Margaret, you're new here. In rural areas, we know our audience. If we serve every Joe Schmo who comes in to escape the sun or look at cars they'll never buy, we lose time with real customers." Some laughed, others nodded in agreement. Interesting point, Charles, Margaret replied calmly. Let me ask you, how many vehicles did you sell last month? Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair. 3 vehicles, but times have been tough and I understand. And do you know how much yesterday's prejudice cost the dealership? $4 million. That's more than the combined sales of the entire team over the last 2 months. Silence took over the room. I'm not here to judge the past, but to build a different future. Headquarters sent me with a clear mission to reverse the declining results of this branch, and I'm going to do that with or without your cooperation. Those who are willing to change and grow with me will have my full support. Those who aren't, well, there are many salespeople looking for opportunities. The message was clear. As the team dispersed to start the day, Margaret noticed that some employees seemed thoughtful, others resentful. She knew there was a lot of work ahead to change deep-rooted mindsets. Meanwhile, at Pleasant View Farm, the largest of Thomas's properties, the day began as always, very early. Despite his comfortable financial condition, the old farmer maintained simple habits. He woke up at 5 in the morning, had a hearty breakfast prepared by Mrs. Betty, his housekeeper for over 30 years, and went out to supervise the work, in the fields. That particular morning, his grandson Timothy, recently graduated in agronomy, accompanied him. "Grandpa, I heard you bought new trucks," commented the young man as they walked among soybean fields. "Yes, I did. 5 to start with. If all goes well, we'll expand to Montana later this year." "At North Star, I thought you had given up after that arrogant salesman treated you badly." Thomas smiled, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to illuminate the vast green fields. "Things have changed over there. There's a new woman in charge, Margaret, a woman of substance who knows how to recognize people's value beyond appearances." Timothy looked at his grandfather with admiration. At 68, Thomas Miller still maintained the same determination that had transformed him from a sharecropper's son into one of the region's largest agricultural producers. Always dressed simply, with his inseparable straw hat and faded shirts, many were mistaken in thinking he was just another farm worker. "You could sue that guy, Grandpa. What he did was prejudice and discrimination." Thomas shook his head. "Lawsuits don't teach anyone anything, son. That young man already lost his job. What he needs now is to reflect and grow as a person. Life is already giving him the lesson he needs." Back at the dealership, traffic was slow that morning. Margaret took the opportunity to get to know each team member better, having individual conversations with employees. It was during one of these conversations that she discovered something disturbing. Lisa, a young administrative assistant, revealed that the practice of filtering customers by appearance was not only common, but encouraged by previous management and by the regional director himself. "Paul always said our dealership is like an exclusive club," explained Lisa. "He insisted we should focus only on customers who matched the environment. Ryan was just following what everyone did." "And do you think that's right?" asked Margaret. Lisa hesitated before answering. "I never felt good about it. My father is a simple man, works as a mechanic. If he came in here, he'd probably be treated like Mr. Miller was." "Thank you for your honesty, Lisa. This will change, I promise." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, a week after Thomas's purchase, the story of the simple farmer who bought 5 luxury trucks began to circulate around town. For a rural community in Pennsylvania like Lancaster, cases like this quickly become talk of the town. Some customers came to the dealership asking about the millionaire hillbilly, as Thomas began to be called. Margaret tried to use the interest to transform the team's mindset. She organized special training on inclusive service and against prejudice. To her surprise, participation was higher than expected. Even Charles, the skeptical salesman, seemed to be reconsidering his stance. On a hot Thursday afternoon, Margaret's cell phone rang. It was Paul Mitchell, her boss, requesting an urgent meeting for the following day. "I'll be there at 10 a.m., he announced. "We have a lot to discuss about your changes." The tone didn't seem friendly, and Margaret felt a knot in her stomach. She knew her approach wouldn't please everyone, especially those accustomed to the old system. But she hadn't expected such a quick intervention from Paul. That night, arriving at her apartment, Margaret allowed herself a moment of vulnerability that she rarely showed. At 45, she had faced many challenges in her career. As a woman in a predominantly male environment, each promotion meant twice the effort and results. The regional management position was her great achievement after 20 years with the company. Starting as a receptionist and studying at night to earn her degree in business administration. Now she felt that everything could crumble because of her decision to do what was right, not just what was profitable. "I won't back down," she told herself, while going through documents that proved the decline in sales and increase in complaints under the previous management. If Paul wanted a battle, she would be prepared. The next morning, Paul Mitchell arrived at the dealership with his usual air of superiority. Tall, always impeccably dressed, and with an ostentatious Rolex on his wrist, he considered himself not just an executive, but a symbol of success. "Margaret," he greeted coldly as he entered her office, "I see you've already made yourself comfortable." "Good morning, Paul. Yes, I'm adapting and implementing the necessary changes to reverse the negative results." Paul sat down, calmly crossing his legs. "That's what I want to talk about. It's come to my attention that you fired one of our best salesmen and are promoting a, how shall I put it, cultural revolution around here. I'm correcting harmful practices that were driving customers away and tarnishing the brand's reputation," Margaret replied, keeping calm. "The numbers don't lie, Paul. The decline in sales began more than a year ago. Numbers can be interpreted in many ways, dear." The condescending tone was evident. "This region has its peculiarities. Our audience is select, exclusive. We can't transform North Star Motors into a popular dealership." "Exclusivity doesn't mean prejudice," Margaret countered. "The customer who was humiliated 3 consecutive times bought 5 trucks worth $4 million. That's not popular, it's good business sense." Paul gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah yes, the famous millionaire hillbilly. A happy coincidence that you knew how to exploit, I must admit, but we can't base our strategy on exceptions. It's not an exception when we lose sales by prejudging customers. I have the numbers right here." Margaret pushed a folder toward him. 19 formal complaints in 6 months, all related to poor service or discriminatory treatment. Paul barely looked at the documents. "Look, Margaret, I'll be direct. You're on probation. Your mission is to improve results, not reinvent our culture. The board is concerned about your initiatives." "The board or you, Paul?" The direct question caught the director by surprise. "Careful, Margaret. Don't forget who supported your promotion," he threatened, standing up. "You have 1 month to show concrete results with your new approach, or I'll have to reconsider your position. And no more dismissals without my express authorization." "Understood." After Paul's departure, Margaret remained seated, processing what had happened. It was clear that her boss did not approve of the changes and was just waiting for an opportunity to remove her from the position. As she pondered her next steps, a gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Lisa. "Sorry to bother you, Margaret, but there's someone here to see you, Mr. Thomas Miller." Surprised by the unexpected visit, Margaret quickly regained her professional composure and went to greet the farmer. Thomas was waiting in the showroom, observing the vehicles on display. Seeing him, Margaret noticed that despite the straw hat and simple clothes, there was something undeniably dignified and strong about his presence. "Mr. Miller, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today?" The farmer smiled, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "I came to see how things are going here, Miss Margaret, and also to bring a proposal." "A proposal?" Margaret led him to her office, curious. Once seated, Thomas got straight to the point. "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding expanding to Montana. I've calculated that I'll need 10 more trucks in the next 6 months." Margaret's eyes widened. A sale like that would be the largest in the branch's history. "That's excellent, Mr. Miller. I can prepare a special plan with progressive discounts for a fleet of that size." Thomas nodded, but his look indicated there was more. "There's something else, Miss Margaret. I heard you're trying to change things around here, make it so everyone is treated with respect, regardless of appearance." "Yes, I am trying," she confirmed, surprised that the news had reached his ears. "Lancaster is small, news travels fast," he explained, as if reading her thoughts. "What you're doing is important, more than you might imagine. Do you know how many farmers like me avoid doing business here because of the treatment they receive?" Margaret hadn't thought about that. The region was one of the country's largest agricultural hubs, with farmers who, like Thomas, didn't flaunt their wealth in their clothing or appearance. "I imagine there are many," she replied. "Many indeed. That's why, in addition to the trucks, I want to propose a partnership. Miller Transport is growing and needs a reliable partner for fleet maintenance and future expansions. I'm willing to sign an exclusivity contract with North Star Motors under one condition." "Which would be?" "That you continue with this work of changing the culture, that everyone is treated with the same respect, whatever their appearance or origin." Margaret felt a wave of emotion. It was exactly the support she needed at that moment, after Paul's veiled threat. "Mr. Miller, it would be an honor to establish this partnership, and I promise I'll continue working to make this dealership an example of respect and inclusion." With a handshake, they sealed an agreement that went far beyond business. It was an alliance based on shared values, which could change not only the dealership, but establish a new standard for business in the region. What neither of them knew was that outside the office, Paul Mitchell was observing the interaction through the glass, with a somber expression that indicated the battle was just beginning. The next morning, Margaret gathered the entire team to share the news of the partnership with Miller Transport. The reaction was one of widespread enthusiasm. A contract of that magnitude meant not only substantial commissions, but security and stability for everyone. "This was only possible because we decided to change our approach," explained Margaret. "Mr. Miller could have taken his business to any competitor after the treatment he received here, but he chose to give us a chance because he saw sincerity in our change." Charles, the skeptical salesman who had previously questioned the new policy, was the first to speak up. "I have to admit I was wrong, Margaret. I always thought I knew our market, but maybe I was just repeating prejudices." Other employees also expressed support for the changes. There was a renewed energy in the environment, a sense of shared purpose that didn't exist before. However, not everyone was celebrating. Hours after the meeting, Margaret received a call from Paul. "I heard about your partnership with the farmer," he said dryly. "Congratulations on the achievement, but we need to discuss the terms before any formal signing." "The terms have already been agreed upon, Paul. The contract is being prepared by legal. Without my approval." The irritation was evident in his voice. "You're overstepping your boundaries, Margaret. As regional director, I need to approve any contract over $2 million. Standard procedure was followed. I sent all the documentation for headquarters approval last night, as per protocol. In fact, I already received positive feedback from the board this morning." A tense silence followed on the other end of the line. "I see," Paul finally said. "Well, I'll want to review everything personally. I'll be there tomorrow." After hanging up, Margaret couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. It was clear that Paul saw the partnership not as an achievement for the company, but as a threat to his control and authority. Meanwhile, at Pleasant View Farm, Thomas was facing his own challenges. His eldest son, Edward, was not happy with the decision to sign exclusivity with North Star Motors. "Dad, we should have negotiated with more dealerships to get a better price," argued Edward during dinner. "You're letting the personal side influence a business decision." Thomas observed his son with patience. Edward, at 45, was a competent and calculating man, with a degree in business administration and responsible for the financial part of the family business. Unlike his father, he always dressed in brand-name clothes and drove imported cars. "It's not just price that matters, son. It's trust, partnership, knowing we'll be treated with respect." "That's old-fashioned talk, Dad," Edward retorted. "Business is business. If they treat us badly, we sue and go somewhere else, simple as that." Timothy, Thomas's grandson, intervened. "Uncle, Grandpa isn't just buying trucks. He's investing in a change of mindset. This goes far beyond a few percentage points of discount." Edward looked at his nephew with some impatience. "You two are the same dreamers. Reality is harsher than that. What if this Margaret person is replaced? What if the dealership returns to old practices after we sign an exclusive 3-year contract? It was a valid concern, and Thomas knew it. That's exactly why we need to support her now, Edward, to ensure that the changes consolidate and become permanent. The debate continued throughout the evening, reflecting a deeper division in the Miller family. On one side, Edward's pragmatic and purely financial vision; on the other, the more humanistic approach of Thomas and Timothy, who believed that business should reflect ethical and human values. What none of them could foresee was that this family division would soon intertwine with the conflicts at the dealership, creating a storm that would test the determination and principles of everyone involved. The next morning, Paul Mitchell arrived at the dealership accompanied by Ryan, the salesman who had been fired for humiliating Thomas. Margaret received them in her office, surprised and concerned by the presence of the former employee. "Paul, what does this mean?" "I'm exercising my prerogative as regional director," he replied with a cold smile. "After reviewing the case, I concluded that Ryan's dismissal was hasty and disproportionate. He will be reinstated as sales manager." "Sales manager?" Margaret couldn't hide her indignation. "That's a promotion for someone who violated our service policies." Paul adjusted himself in the chair, clearly satisfied with her reaction. "You see, Margaret, after a more detailed analysis, I realized that Ryan was just following the guidelines established for our target audience. He has excellent results with premium profile customers who constitute the traditional base of our business. You're deliberately sabotaging the changes I've implemented, Paul. Changes that are already bringing positive results. I'm ensuring we don't lose our identity because of an isolated case of success," he corrected. "The millionaire hillbilly was a stroke of luck, not a new market strategy." Ryan remained silent, but his arrogant smile said it all. He was back and with more power than before. "And what about the partnership with Miller Transport?" questioned Margaret. "How will we explain to Mr. Miller that we rehired and promoted precisely the man who repeatedly humiliated him?" "You're overestimating the influence of this farmer, dear." Paul used that condescending tone again that so irritated Margaret. "North. Star Motors has a decades-old reputation and much more important customers than a farmer with a few trucks." The deliberate underestimation of Thomas's economic power showed how disconnected Paul was from the local reality, or worse, how willing he was to distort it to maintain his control. "This is a mistake, Paul, a mistake that could cost the company dearly. The only mistake would be allowing a manager on probation to redesign our entire commercial strategy," he replied, standing up. "The decision is made. Ryan takes over tomorrow. As for you, you still have 3 weeks to prove that your other innovations deserve to continue." After Paul and Ryan's departure, Margaret remained in her office, trying to process what had happened and plan her next steps. It was clear that Paul not only disagreed with her approach, but was actively working to sabotage it. Her phone rang. It was Lisa. "Margaret, sorry to bother you, but Mr. Miller is on the line. He wants to confirm the date for signing the partnership contract." The timing couldn't be worse. How to explain to Thomas that the man who had treated him with contempt was not only back, but promoted to a leadership position? "Transfer the call, please," asked Margaret, taking a deep breath. The conversation was as difficult as she had imagined. Thomas listened in silence to the explanation about Paul's intervention and Ryan's reinstatement. "I understand," he finally said. "So nothing has really changed at North Star Motors." "Mr. Miller, please don't think that way," Margaret pleaded. "I'm fighting against this system, against this mentality, but I need time." "Time is something I don't have much of, Miss Margaret," he replied with a hint of sadness. "At my 68 years, I've learned not to waste time with those who don't really want to change. The company wants to change. I want to change. It's just one person trying to maintain the status quo." There was a long silence before Thomas spoke again. "My son Edward always said I'm too stubborn, that I mix feelings with business. Maybe he's right this time." "What does that mean for our partnership?" asked Margaret, fearing the answer. "I'll need to reconsider. Give me a few days." When she hung up, Margaret felt the weight of a battle that seemed increasingly difficult to win. Paul had resources and authority that she didn't possess. If Thomas gave up on the partnership, she would lose not only a major client but also the main proof that her approach worked. That night, arriving home, Margaret did something she rarely did. She cried. Not from sadness or self-pity, but from frustration and anger. She had dedicated her professional life to that company, sacrificing personal relationships and family moments for the sake of her career. Now, when she finally had the chance to make a real difference, to transform a toxic culture into something more human and inclusive, she was being sabotaged by the very system that had promoted her. As she dried her tears, her cell phone vibrated with a message. It was from an unknown number. "Miss Margaret, this is Timothy, Thomas's grandson. My grandfather told me what happened. Don't give up. He's hurt, but he believes in you. Can we meet tomorrow to talk?" That unexpected message lit a small flame of hope. Perhaps the battle wasn't lost after all. The next day, Margaret met Timothy at a coffee shop far from the dealership. The young agronomist, 26, had the same perceptive eyes as his grandfather, but dressed more modernly in jeans and a polo shirt. "My grandfather is torn," explained Timothy after initial greetings. "On one hand, he really believes in what you're trying to do. On the other, my Uncle Edward saw the rehiring of that salesman as proof that nothing will really change. And what do you think, Timothy?" "I think real changes are never easy or quick. If they were, they would have happened already. The question is, do you really believe you can win this battle?" Margaret reflected before answering. It would be easy to give an automatic, optimistic response, but Timothy deserved honesty. "I don't know if I can win, but I know I need to try. It's not just about business or your grandfather. It's about breaking a cycle of prejudice that harms customers, employees, and ultimately the company itself." Timothy smiled, apparently satisfied with the answer. "You know, my grandfather started from nothing. Son of sharecroppers, he worked on other people's land until he could buy his first piece of ground. Even today, with all his success, he still faces prejudice for dressing like a simple man, for maintaining his country ways. I imagine it hasn't been easy for him." "It hasn't. And that's why this partnership means so much. It's not just a business deal, it's a recognition that people's value goes beyond appearances." Margaret felt a renewed determination growing inside her. "Tell your grandfather I won't give up, that the fight has just begun, and that with or without Paul Mitchell, I'm going to transform the culture of North Star Motors." "I'll relay your message, but I have one more thing to say." Timothy leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This Paul guy isn't as powerful as he thinks. I did some research on him." "What kind of research?" "Let's just say his exclusive policies aren't limited to discrimination based on appearance. There are rumors of other questionable practices, especially involving public bids for official fleets." Margaret frowned, concerned. "Timothy, I appreciate it, but I need to win this the right way. Using rumors against Paul would lower me to his level." The young man nodded, respecting her position. "I understand and admire your integrity. I just want you to know that you're not alone in this fight. My grandfather may seem hesitant now, but he recognizes value and character when he sees it." As they parted, Margaret felt strengthened. The battle would be difficult, but now she knew she had allies, even if unexpected ones. Back at the dealership, she found a tense atmosphere. The news of Ryan's reinstatement had already spread, and the team was clearly divided. Some, especially the more senior salespeople, seemed relieved about the return to traditional practices. Others, mainly the younger ones and those who had embraced the changes proposed by Margaret, appeared concerned and disappointed. Lisa was waiting for her with an apprehensive expression. "Margaret, Mr. Paul left instructions that all your new policies are to be reviewed by him before continuing to be implemented. Even the inclusive service training was cancelled. It was to be expected." Paul was methodically dismantling everything she had built in recent weeks. "Lisa, continue with the preparations for the training discreetly. If Paul asks, say we're reviewing the material as requested." "Wouldn't that be disobedience?" Margaret smiled. "That's persistence. There are times when we need to choose between following orders or following principles. I choose principles." The rest of the week passed in a strange Cold War. On one side, Paul and Ryan implementing the return to old practices. On the other, Margaret and a growing faction of employees discreetly resisting, keeping the spirit of change alive. On Friday, when Margaret believed things couldn't get more complicated, a surprise awaited her early in the morning. Thomas Miller entered the dealership, not alone but accompanied by his son Edward and at least a dozen other farmers from the region, all dressed simply, with straw hats, work shirts, and dusty boots, a stark contrast to the luxurious environment of the dealership. Ryan, who was attending a couple in the showroom, paled at the sight of the group. Paul, who coincidentally was visiting the branch that day, quickly left his temporary office to see what was happening. Margaret hurried to receive the visitors. "Mr. Miller, what a surprise! How can I help you all?" The old farmer looked at her with a serene smile. "Good morning, Miss Margaret. We came to do business. These are my friends and neighbors, all producers like me, all needing to renew their fleets." Paul approached with his widest commercial smile, extending his hand to Thomas. "Mr. Miller, it's a pleasure to welcome you and your friends. I'm Paul Mitchell, Regional Director of North Star Motors." Thomas looked at the extended hand, but didn't shake it. "Are you the one who ordered the rehiring of that young man who humiliated me?" he asked directly, pointing to Ryan, who seemed to want to disappear. Paul hesitated, his smile faltering. "There was a misunderstanding in that situation, Mr. Miller. We're always looking to improve our service and—" "Doesn't seem to me you're improving anything," interrupted another farmer, a gray-haired gentleman. "We've been watching what's happening here for weeks. The only person trying to change things for the better is Ms. Margaret." Edward, who until then had been observing in silence, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, I'm Edward Miller, Thomas's son and financial director of Miller Transport. We've come to discuss not just the purchase of trucks for our company, but a much larger agreement." Paul looked at him with renewed interest. Edward, unlike his father and the other farmers, was formally dressed in a suit and tie. "What kind of agreement, Mr. Edward?" "A purchasing cooperative. 15 farmers, 15 fleets to renew in the next 12 months. A total estimated investment of more than $60 million. Paul's eyes widened. "This would be the biggest deal in the branch's history, possibly of the entire North Star Motors network in rural Pennsylvania. That's impressive. We can certainly discuss special conditions for a volume of that magnitude." Thomas raised his hand, interrupting. "We have just one non-negotiable condition." "And what would that be?" asked Paul, already mentally calculating. "The commissions and bonuses that a deal of that size would generate. That Ms. Margaret has complete autonomy to implement her cultural change policies at the dealership, no interference, no sabotage, and that she be promoted to regional director in your place." The silence that followed was almost palpable. Employees stopped what they were doing to observe the scene. Paul looked as if he had been struck by lightning. That's completely irregular and out of the question," he stammered, his face red with indignation. "You can't dictate internal personnel policies of the company as a condition of purchase." Edward smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "Actually, we can. That's how the free market works. We have the capital, and we choose where to invest it. And we choose to invest where our values are respected." The other farmers nodded in agreement. 60 million reasons for you to reconsider your internal policies," added one of them, eliciting laughter from the group. Paul looked at Margaret, a mixture of anger and disbelief on his face. "You planned all this, didn't you?" Margaret was as surprised as he was. "No, Paul, I didn't plan it. I just treated people with the respect they deserve, regardless of how they dress or look. The rest happened naturally." Thomas stepped forward, facing Paul directly. "You have a choice to make now. You can cling to your power and lose the biggest deal of your career, or you can recognize that the world is changing and step aside." Paul looked around, realizing that all eyes were on him. Employees, customers, farmers. It was a decisive moment, not just for his career, but for the entire culture of the company. "I need to consult with headquarters about this," he finally said, backing down. "Of course," agreed Edward. "Meanwhile, we'll be visiting the Planet dealership 2 blocks from here. I'm sure they'll be very interested in our cooperative agreement." The mention of the main competitor was the final blow. Paul knew that if he lost a deal of that size to the competition, his career would be over anyway. "That won't be necessary," he said, forcing a professional smile. "I have the autonomy to make strategic decisions. Let's discuss the terms of the agreement in my office." As Paul led Thomas and Edward to a meeting room, he cast a final look at Margaret. It was no longer anger or indignation, but a strange mixture of reluctant respect and resignation. The battle was far from over, but at that moment, an important victory had been won, not just for Margaret, but for all who believed that respect and dignity should be above appearances and prejudices. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The meeting lasted more than 3 hours. When it finally ended, Paul hurriedly left the dealership without speaking to anyone, his face a rigid mask of control. Edward and Thomas, on the other hand, came out with satisfied expressions. Margaret, who had been anxiously waiting in the showroom, approached. "So, what happened in there?" Thomas smiled, that serene smile that seemed to carry the wisdom of decades of life. "We made history today, Miss Margaret. Not just a good deal, but a step toward changing how people like me are treated." Edward, more pragmatic, explained the details. "The deal is closed. The cooperative will initially purchase 30 trucks with an option for 20 more in the next 6 months. Paul agreed to all our conditions, including your total autonomy in service policies." "And what about the other condition?" asked Margaret hesitantly. "Your promotion?" Edward smiled. He resisted that part quite a bit, as expected, but we offered him an honorable exit. He'll be transferred to national management in Philadelphia, a move that can be sold as a promotion. You will take over the regional directorship in his place." Margaret could hardly believe it. It was everything she had worked to achieve, but happening in a way she could never have predicted. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank us," Thomas gently interrupted. "You earned this on your own merit. We just gave a little push so the recognition would come faster." Timothy, who had remained discreetly in the back of the room throughout the negotiation, approached with a proud smile. "See, I told you my grandfather recognizes value when he sees it." At that moment, Lisa ran up to them, visibly agitated. "Margaret, I just received a call from headquarters. The chairman of the board wants to speak with you immediately." A tense silence fell over the group. Had Paul already contacted headquarters to try to reverse the agreement? "Take the call here," suggested Edward. "Put it on speakerphone. We need to know exactly what's happening." With her heart racing, Margaret took Lisa's phone and answered the call, activating the speakerphone. Margaret Thompson speaking. "Margaret, this is Albert Mendoza, chairman of the board of North Star Motors." The formal tone made Margaret instinctively straighten her posture, even on the phone. "Mr. Mendoza, it's an honor to receive your call. I just had a very interesting conversation with Paul Mitchell about the developments at your branch," continued the chairman. "The Farmers Cooperative? 60 million in new business, am I correct?" "Yes, sir, we just finalized the preliminary agreement. And part of that agreement involves significant changes in regional management, including your promotion to directorship in place of Paul. Is that also correct?" Margaret hesitated, looking at Thomas and Edward, who nodded encouragingly. "That was one of the conditions presented by the clients, yes." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Albert spoke again. "Normally, we don't appreciate when clients try to dictate our internal personnel policies. It's a rather serious breach of protocol." Margaret's heart sank. It was what she feared. "However," continued Albert, surprising her, "in this specific case, the board has been observing the problematic situation at that branch for some time. Results had been consistently declining under Paul's management, while complaints were increasing." "Sir, let me finish, please," he politely interrupted. "Your initiatives over the past few weeks haven't gone unnoticed by us. Several reports reached headquarters, both official ones and, let's say, unofficial comments from employees who appreciated your changes. The fact that you secured a deal of this size in such a short time only confirms what we already suspected. You are the right person to lead the transformation that branch needs." Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes, but maintained her composure. "Thank you, sir. I'm not doing you a favor, I'm making a business decision," Albert clarified. "Your promotion to regional directorship was already being considered for the next quarter. Today's events just accelerated the process. Paul will be transferred to a special project at headquarters, and you will officially take over on Monday. Our HR team will contact you to formalize everything." When the call ended, there was a moment of perplexed silence before an explosion of applause from the employees who had discreetly gathered to listen. Lisa was the first to hug Margaret, followed by other team members who had supported her changes from the beginning. Thomas observed the scene with a tranquil smile. Edward seemed satisfied with the business outcome, and Timothy didn't hide his enthusiasm. "See? Everything works out when the right people unite for the right reasons," commented the young agronomist. Later that day, after the farmers had left and with emotions somewhat more controlled, Margaret allowed herself a moment of reflection in her office. In just a few weeks, her professional life had completely transformed, going from a manager on probation to regional director. But beyond the promotion, there was a much more significant victory, proof that it was possible to change. A toxic organizational culture, that respect and dignity could indeed walk hand in hand with impressive commercial results. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Charles, the skeptical salesman who had initially resisted her changes. "May I come in?" "Of course, Charles. What's up?" The salesman looked uncomfortable, nervously fidgeting with a catalog in his hands. I wanted to apologize. At first I thought your ideas were naive, that they wouldn't work in the real world. I was wrong." Margaret smiled, appreciating the sincerity. "Thank you, Charles. That means a lot to me. And know that I greatly value your experience and knowledge. We'll need everyone working together to implement these changes throughout the region." "About that?" Charles hesitated before continuing. "There's a customer I've always avoided serving, a university professor who has been coming here for months looking at luxury cars. I always thought it was just curiosity, that he would never buy. But after today I'm thinking, what if I'm wrong about him too?" Margaret nodded, understanding the lesson the salesman was learning on his own. "Why don't you invite him to come again? This time with a different approach." "I'll do that. And Margaret, congratulations on your promotion. It's deserved." The following week, the transformations accelerated. The story of the millionaire hillbilly and the farmers' cooperative spread quickly through the vehicle dealership sector in the region. Other establishments began to reassess their service policies, fearing losing similar business. Ryan, realizing that the winds had definitely changed, resigned before Margaret could decide his fate. According to rumors, he had secured a position at a smaller, more traditional dealership in another town. Paul, on the other hand, adapted surprisingly well to the new reality. In his position at headquarters, without direct contact with customers, and away from the front line, his administrative skills could shine without his prejudices interfering with business. Most impressive was the transformation in results. In the weeks following the agreement with the cooperative, the Lancaster branch recorded a 60% increase in overall sales, not just trucks, but all vehicles. Customers who previously felt intimidated by the exclusive environment now felt welcome to explore options. Margaret implemented an anti-prejudice training program that soon became a model for the entire North Star Motors network. Lisa was promoted to Human Resources Manager, with the specific mission of ensuring that the inclusive culture was maintained and strengthened. The partnership with Miller Transport blossomed beyond simple commercial transactions. Thomas became a kind of informal consultant for inclusion issues, frequently visiting the dealership to talk with new employees and share his perspective. Timothy, with his training in agronomy and progressive vision, helped develop a special program to serve farmers, identifying specific needs that were previously ignored by the dealership. This program became so successful that it was expanded to other branches. Edward, initially skeptical about mixing personal values with business, was perhaps the most surprised by the positive results. The partnership not only brought substantial financial benefits to Miller Transport, but also elevated the company's profile in the region, opening doors for new business and opportunities. On a quiet afternoon, 6 months after that transformative day, Thomas visited Margaret in her new regional director's office. "Ms. Margaret, I came to say goodbye. I'm heading to Montana for a few weeks to supervise the opening of our new branch there. That's a big expansion, Mr. Miller. I'm happy for your success." The old farmer smiled, looking out the window at the activity of the dealership below. The showroom was full, with a diversity of customers never seen before. "You know, when I first came in here and was treated that way, I thought about never coming back. I was tired of fighting against prejudice all my life. What made you come back?" Thomas adjusted his inseparable straw hat. "My grandson Timothy. He told me, Grandpa, if you give up, nothing will change. But if you stand up to it, you can change things not just for yourself, but for many others like us." And he was right. Margaret nodded, moved. "He's a very wise young man. He takes after someone," Thomas joked, eliciting laughter. "But seriously, Ms. Margaret, what we've built here is important. It goes beyond business. It's about dignity, about being seen for who you are, not for what you wear or appear to be." "And this is just the beginning," agreed Margaret. "The model we created here is being implemented in other branches. The anti-prejudice training has become standard across the network. We're truly transforming the culture. That gives me peace to depart." Margaret frowned, concerned. "Depart? You're not going to—" Thomas laughed at her expression. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about retiring, finally passing the leadership to Edward and Timothy. They're ready, and I'm ready to fish more and work less. You deserve it after so many years of hard work. We all deserve dignity and respect, Miss Margaret. It's the minimum, and thanks to people like you, perhaps future generations won't have to fight so hard for it." When Thomas left, Margaret remained at the window observing the activity below. Customers of all types being served with the same respect, regardless of their clothes or appearance. Salespeople focused on understanding needs, not judging financial capabilities by appearance. A real cultural transformation, measurable both in the numbers and in the atmosphere. Living proof that doing right can also be the most profitable. And it all started with a farmer in a straw hat who refused to be less than he was, and a manager who refused to accept the status quo. That night, leaving the dealership, Margaret noticed a simply dressed man observing the luxury vehicles in the showroom window. In other times, he would probably have been ignored or treated with disdain. Now a salesperson approached him with a genuine smile, inviting him in. Margaret smiled, continuing on her way. The seed had been planted and was already bearing fruit. The rest was just a matter of time and persistence. 3 months later, the Lancaster North Star Motors was recognized as the branch with the highest growth in the entire network's history. In a ceremony in Philadelphia, Margaret received the Executive of the Year award from the hands of Albert Mendoza himself. "What you did was extraordinary, Margaret," commented Albert during the reception after the award ceremony. "You completely transformed the culture of a problematic branch and established a new standard for the entire network." "I had help, sir. A lot of help. I'm particularly impressed with the program for farmers. Sales in that segment have increased 300% across the network since we began implementing it in other branches." "It was Timothy Miller's idea, Mr. Thomas's grandson. He identified that we were ignoring an immense market out of pure prejudice." Albert nodded, thoughtful. "You know, when Paul contacted us that day, furious about customers dictating personnel policies, my first instinct was to support him. After all, we don't usually allow external pressures to influence our internal decisions. And what changed your perception? Numbers don't lie, Margaret. Your branch was showing consistent improvement since you took over, while others under. Paul's supervision continued to decline. And then, investigating further, we discovered the history of complaints about poor service, especially from customers who didn't fit the premium profile that Paul so valued. Prejudice has a cost, doesn't it? And it's not just moral, it's financial too." "Exactly. And that's what finally convinced the board. It wasn't just the business opportunity with the cooperative, but the realization that we were systematically ignoring a huge market segment due to misconceptions." The conversation was interrupted by a team of journalists who wanted to interview Margaret about her innovative strategy. The story of the millionaire hillbilly had become legendary in the industry, and now business magazines were interested in understanding how a simple change in approach had completely transformed the dealership's results. While answering questions, Margaret noticed a familiar face among the guests. It was Ryan, her former salesman, now apparently working as a representative for an auto parts manufacturer. Their gazes briefly crossed. There was no longer arrogance. In his face, just a kind of resigned recognition. Later, to her surprise, Ryan approached while she was alone for a moment. "Congratulations on the award, Margaret. It's deserved." "Thank you, Ryan. How's life treating you?" He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of many lessons learned. "Different. Losing that job was a reality check. I spent a few weeks blaming you, the farmer, everyone except myself. And now? Now I understand I had a lot to learn. I'm still learning, actually. It's not easy to abandon prejudices you didn't even know you had." Margaret nodded, understanding. "It's not easy for any of us. It's a daily effort." That story about the farmer and all, it's become kind of a legend in our industry. They use it as an example in training, did you know? "I can imagine." Ryan hesitated before asking a final question. "Do you think I'd have a chance if I wanted to come back? Not necessarily to the same branch, but to the network." The question caught Margaret by surprise. There was a time when she would have immediately rejected the idea, but now, seeing the genuine change in Ryan, she considered the possibility. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Ryan. Send your resume. You'll get a fair evaluation, I promise." With a grateful nod, he walked away, leaving Margaret with her thoughts. The transformation was truly profound, reaching not just systems and processes, but people, one at a time. The next morning, back in Lancaster, Margaret found a bouquet of flowers on her desk with a simple card: "To someone who had the courage to change what seemed unchangeable. With admiration, the Miller family." The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes. They weren't just flowers, it was recognition of a shared journey, of a battle won not just by her, but by all who believed. That respect and dignity should be above appearances and prejudices. That same day, a gentleman in a straw hat, very similar to Thomas, entered the dealership. He was just a small producer, interested in a simple pickup truck for his property. In other times, he might have been ignored. Now he was received as the important customer he truly was. The planted seed continued to germinate, grow, flourish. It was just the beginning of a much larger transformation, one that went beyond the limits of that dealership and touched the lives of ordinary people, who, like Thomas, simply wished to be seen as they really were, not by appearance, but for their true value. In the end, the story of the salesman who humiliated the farmer became much more than a country tale or a corporate lesson. It transformed into a symbol of how small actions of resistance against prejudice can trigger profound and lasting changes. And for Margaret Thompson, the executive who had the courage to challenge the system, it was confirmation that following ethical principles was not only the right thing to do, but also the surest path to true success. End of story. What did you think of the ending? Did this true story touch your heart? Share in the comments your experience with prejudice and judgments based on appearance. Your like and subscription to the channel help us continue bringing these stories of overcoming that inspire us to be better people. Thank you for joining us all the way.